Everyone, it's a real pleasure to be here today. I hear you're a really engaged crowd with lots of really interesting questions. So whilst I'm slightly petrified, I'm also really excited to chat to you. The discussion I'd really like to host is on how you as entrepreneurs can help make the next wave of sustainable business happen. What is that next wave? We're calling it a just and regenerative approach. I've got a few polls and questions I'd like your thoughts on as we go through, as Shamila has just said. So please do interact and post any questions you have in the chat, and hopefully we'll have a deeper chat at the end of the presentation. My name is Anna Warrington, or Anna Biswas, depending on the grant application we're named under or the project we're on. I come from an organization called Forum for the Future, and I head up our Mumbai office, which is one of 4 internationally, as I said. We work with some of the most influential organizations internationally, not just businesses, but also philanthropies, civil society organizations, governments as well. We work to ensure the transitions in food, energy, and that role of business in bringing about a just and regenerative future, that they happen fast and in a way that doesn't cause more harm than good. We simultaneously catalyze change in those systems and also build the ability of people to act more systemically, to go deeper, as we were just talking about. I'm going to cover why we need a just and regenerative approach, what it actually means using our business transformation compass, and how it can be put into practice. I'm here with our
commercial rubber. What we are going to use is 100% rubber. So the quality itself.
Could I ask you to mute, guys, if that's all right, just to make sure we don't get the background information? Thank you.
Sorry, I got that. Sorry, got that comment.
No, it's really, I totally understand. Not all of it is within our realm of control. So I guess I'm here with a hypothesis that entrepreneurs are actually ideally suited to bring about this next wave that I'm talking about, the new horizon of sustainable business. And I'd really like to hear your opinion on that hypothesis. Before I start, I don't know, there's a hand showing function. I'd be really interested to hear through a show of hands, who is already familiar with what I'm calling a just and regenerative approach or a regenerative business? Is there anyone that already knows about this concept really deeply? No pressure, but if you say yes, I might call on you later. Okay, Manas, great. Okay. All right, I might share the questions with you, Manas. All right, brilliant, thank you. So I'll get into a little bit more about what we actually mean by a regenerative approach then later on, and I'll make sure that we're all clear, because sometimes it can be a bit of jargon. But firstly, why is it needed? Why is this next wave needed when we already have what we call ESG and sustainable business? You'll probably recognize these 3 waves, these sort of steps or levels. Doing less harm was wave 1 of sustainable business. No harm or neutrality was wave 2. Then we realized that we needed to put more back in than we took out, and wave 3 came about. And that's what sustainable business wave kind of level 3 was, and net positive, putting more back into the environment and society than we take out. Oh, sorry, bear with me, my controls. You'll recognize these 3 waves, I think, and you'll probably think of examples of each. I'd love to hear them actually in the chat, so please do type them in if you have examples of organizations that operate at each level. Just as thought provokers, I guess. Many of you will be familiar with IKEA's net positive for commitments, for instance, so they're definitely at level 3, at least at the moment. But you've got kind of companies like construction companies who will remain nameless, I think, to be fair, who have gotten as far as making 0 fatality aims. Now, that's a bit wave 1 to me, minimizing your negative impacts, doing less harm. So I think all of us can probably imagine different organizations at each of these 3 different levels. We've had many organizations tell us that level 3 is actually already pretty darn hard. It's pretty ambitious to be able to do that in this current paradigm and still run a profitable, viable business in today's economic system. Well, yes and no. It turns out putting more back in than we take just isn't enough. You can see that all around us. The climate change situation is getting worse. We're certainly not anywhere near our targets that we need in order to stay below 1.5, and it's probably likely that we'll break 2. That has catastrophic consequences for many of us, specifically here in India and around the world. We're also experiencing many other greater divides in inequity and huge issues that aren't being fixed by our current way of doing things. So to use an analogy, we use this analogy of actually being bailed out from the banks, but I think here in India, it's easier to describe, for instance, if you imagine nature as a discom, an electricity distribution company, we bail them out approximately every 3 years with some scheme or another, right? But they always need another bailout as we're constantly taking from them whilst we're paying our bills and possibly putting more in than you take out. Admittedly, it's rare here, admittedly, because of the system. They don't have the conditions or characteristics that mean that they can fix or regenerate themselves, absorb shocks, etc. It's essentially like pouring water into a glass that has holes in the bottom. Natural and social systems are like our discoms, are like that glass. Even if we're bailing them out enough, they're facing conditions in like how we consume, the effects of climate change and inequity, for instance, that mean they can't regenerate on their own. We need to make sure that glass can self-heal those holes. So wave 4, this next level, is reconfiguring and regenerating living systems so that they can thrive. If you imagine a discom that could actually fix itself and the enabling system around it. This wave is needed because of the facts known about the world we now live in and the future we're creating for ourselves. Alex Stefan, a foresight specialist, who some of you may know, but I'd highly recommend looking him up if you haven't come across him already. He calls it the age of discontinuity. But this isn't like dealing with the surprises and curveballs that Mumbai can throw at you, for instance. I think sometimes we think, we live in India, we can deal with discontinuity and surprises, we'll adapt. This is different. This is a perfect storm of social and economic transformation in the face of massive environmental change. If we do, and this is a choice, decide to try and avert the worst of climate change, the discontinuity will come from the massive and very quick changes in our energy, mobility, and production and consumption systems, whilst facing the already baked in levels of physical climate change that we have already guaranteed ourselves from past emissions. If we choose not to try and avert the worst of climate change, or we give in to what is known as predatory delay and put it all off, then we will see massive discontinuity as our environmentally dependent systems collapse. And that means food, water, safe habitation, and we'll just see societies scramble to survive. We're seeing that already in different places in the world. Neither of these will be business as usual or minor tweaks. I don't think there are many people that have truly let this fact sink in. This isn't the tweaking around the edges of our economic system that means we move to, say, for instance, a model of green capitalism. This isn't hundreds of unicorns focused on clean energy and circular economy. This is massive discontinuity. This is an economy that sustains, so if we're talking about a just and regenerative move, this is an economy that sustains the well-being of all and the capacity of our natural world to replenish itself, while enabling long-term, broad-based prosperity. That's the difference. This is aiming to tackle the deep underlying causes of the issues and challenges that we face, coupled with holding a mindset that's actually more resilient to and able to work with complexity and change. Now, I think you might be able to see and be beginning to see why I think entrepreneurs have so much potential here, especially with that second part about the mindset. So what does it actually look like? It's all very well us saying that we need to dismantle systems of oppression and reimagine what is aspirational, for instance, but what does that mean to you day to day? We teamed up with the WBCSD, the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, to write this brief actually on how, and there's a lot more detail than I'll go into in this link. So we'll share these slides afterwards, and feel free to go and have a look at the detail within this brief. What it does is it clarifies the definition of regenerative business. It also gives practical guidance on how to apply the approach in different areas of business. And it's supported by and kind of piloted by these well-known names that you'll see on the right-hand side here. The definition itself has three elements, and it starts with the fact that we embrace the power of nature. We understand that we are a fundamental part of it, and the importance of respecting everybody's universal human rights and potential to thrive, not just focus on benefiting the few. If we did this, it would mean our future looks like a society and environment where systems are thriving. We'd have stabilized our planetary health. Our human rights would basically be a given. We'd have found fairer ways to create and distribute value in our value chains. And we have resilience and vitality across generations and geographies. These 5 outcomes on that previous slide and up on the top here all depend on a wiser way of thinking and acting, being embedded in business, government, and society. I say wiser because it recognizes that that harming and exploiting the operating context of what the organization depends on will damage the organization sooner or later, while creating a positive, self-perpetuating wave of justice and regeneration can build the capacity for all life to grow, evolve, and thrive, including your own operations. This way of thinking requires business leaders to see the world with new eyes and to be open to a very different way of thinking and operating that may at first feel strange or even alien when compared to current business approaches. I'd like to put it forward that entrepreneurs such as yourselves are actually the best suited business leaders to be able to do this and live these following principles in real life. So what are these principles? Well, starting with potential and possibilities, not problems. Starting with focusing on how you do things, not so much what you're aiming to achieve. Starting with the potential and possibilities, not problems. Instead of focusing on what's wrong or lacking, begin with a broad view of the possibility in the system you're considering. While we're not suggesting ignoring any problems at all, this positive approach can help realize greater potential. Focusing on overall health of the greater whole your business is part of. Don't pursue a narrow set of targets with specific outcomes that apply only to your own business, for instance, and this is where it differs from the previous 3 levels of sustainable business. Taking an authentically participatory approach, valuing the potential, the agency, and dignity of all stakeholders, finding meaningful ways to co-create actions, valuing our lived history and lived experience. All of these would be wiser ways of thinking and acting, being embedded in business, government, and society. I'd like to take a quick poll at this point, actually. I'd really love to hear from you guys what you think, which of these principles you think is the easiest for you as an entrepreneur. I have a feeling that some of these are much more easy for you guys in the way that you think than for, say, for instance, big incumbent business leaders. So you'll see on the screen now a poll that says, which of these principles would be easiest for you as an entrepreneur? Is it the first one of focusing on how you do things, not just where you want to get to? Is it about starting with potential, not problems? Is it about caring for the health of your operating context, valuing the history and lived experience of those stakeholders around you, or taking an authentically participatory approach? And yeah, I'd be really interested in your thoughts. Please do pop into the poll. Camila, I don't know when show when you're ready.
50% have said an answer, but I think we'll wait for about 30 seconds for more people to answer. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, we have over 60% of people have already answered. So I'll wait for another 20 seconds, maybe.
Yeah, no pressure, guys. Fastest fingers first.
Right, I think I'm going to end the poll, if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds great.
I'm going to share the results. Yeah.
Ah, brilliant. Okay, focusing on how you do things. I thought that might come up. And also the starting with potential and not problems. I think you have a positive outlook on, what you aim to achieve. And so that's really interesting to hear. I'm going to go the other way now. And I'd be really interested in understanding from you, which of these might be the hardest for you as an entrepreneur in your circumstances? What might be hardest for you to do? Shamila, if you could just, thank you. All right. I think now you've got the hang of this. Want to share the results, Shamila?
Yes, I'm just waiting for at least 50% people to answer. Yeah, I'm going to now end the poll. Yeah.
Thank you. Ah, interesting. So caring for the health of your operating context and taking an authentically participatory approach. I would love to hear at the end of this more about why people scored these as they did. I had actually thought it might be the taking an authentically participatory approach, because in our work with entrepreneurs and even with larger businesses, this is really hard to do. It takes time, it takes money, and those are two resources that startups and micro entrepreneurs are not wealthy in. So yeah, interesting that came out. And caring for the health of your operating context, you have to be very, very driven and focused to make a business work in those first few years. So I can understand that can be a real challenge. Thank you. Maybe we can talk about this later on in the discussion. For now, I'm just going to move us on to exactly sort of how this works out. So a just and regenerative approach to business is about a set of activities coupled with a set of principles and a mindset shift. It's no small task. The previous waves haven't needed a mindset shift, really. It's been the current wave of business, our way of doing things, plus trying to do things a little bit better. This is different. Now, when we're talking about a mindset shift, what exactly do we mean? The term mindset, it's often used interchangeably with worldview or paradigm. It's a set of assumptions, concepts, and values that inform how we see the world. For individuals, it informs how we act, consciously and subconsciously. And for communities and organizations, it underpins how we organize and how we interact. The business transformation compass that is in that brief that we did with the WBCSD talks about 4 very different mindsets that can be applied to business. And they sort of mirror the 4 waves that we've just been talking about. It helps organizations self-identify where they are in those mindsets and their approach, and where they also want to be. You'll notice that there's one that's the risk mitigation mindset, the zero harm mindset, do good, and then the just and regenerative mindset up there at the top. The risk mitigation mindset in itself, you'll see on the right-hand side here, very familiar things that it focuses upon. The risk in this mindset is that it overlooks opportunities to build long-term value and does leave the business quite vulnerable actually to disruptions and unattractive to investors. It can also make it harder to recruit and retain staff if you're just looking at this as a risk mitigation exercise. You can see why businesses do it though, as it requires the least effort and investment. It's easier to action, and it guards against those short-term risks that are often the priority in the kind of dominant business leader mindset. So you might hear these things being said in a risk mitigation mindset. I'm sure you can think of a few examples. In fact, you might have even heard this yourself, where I'd love to hear in chat if you're up for it. Please do share examples of businesses and people that come to mind here. I'll go through it because I'm conscious of time, but yeah, I'm very keen to hear your own opinions on where these things crop up. The second mindset comes to a sort of zero harm approach, and it's that second level of sustainable business. It tends to aim for zero emissions and ending rights violations, for instance. The risks here tend to be that they miss opportunities, again, for greater positive impact. It is also harder and more costly in the short term than a less ambitious approach. So, we have to face into the fact that the more you do up these levels, the harder it actually is, and often the more investment it does require in the short term. The benefits, however, of this next rung of taking this mindset is that it does actually reduce your exposure to risk far more than the risk mindset. You're better able to attract investment from the increasingly ESG-focused investors, and it gives greater credibility to the sustainability claims that you make. These are some of the things we hear from the businesses with this mindset. I'm sure you can think of examples as well. Feel free to pop those in. The third mindset is that do good one, where we're actively trying to create positive change. And it was the cutting edge of what we thought sustainable business should be. And it was that one that's already being flagged as ambitious. But the risks of this mindset is that it doesn't necessarily tackle those root causes, which means that the critical systems that the business that's acting relies upon may still fail. It is that glass with the holes in the bottom. It doesn't tackle the holes. It might be seeking to scale a one-size-fits-all approach, or takes a paternalistic approach that imposes solutions that are unlikely to be effective. So essentially, it applies some of the extractivist mindsets or approaches of our previous system, what got us into this problem in the first place, to trying to apply sustainability. But the benefits of it are that it does go beyond risk avoidance, which means it actually drives innovation that can build long-term value and new market opportunities. It really does begin to positively position the business with consumers. We know we only have a small market of those right now, but I should imagine that it will be growing. It does benefit from diverse leadership, which does tend to lead to greater innovation. It drives sales. It attracts and retains staff, and it creates a race to the top of environmentally and social performance that improves business resilience. You probably have seen this kind of commitment come from some of the leading organizations out there. You'll have heard these things being claimed and said and more or less proven. And yeah, I'm sure you can think of examples here as well. The fourth and final mindset, so that kind of new wave that I have that hypothesis that entrepreneurs have a greater role in bringing about, is the seeking to change the goals of the systems that business are part of. It might be solving interconnected human and planetary health issues, for instance. The risks of this, and they come with many, we're not naive in our approach. We work with some of the biggest organizations and most influential organizations in the world. If this isn't carefully managed as an aspiration, the pace and the scale of the transformation that's needed in the business could actually make the business more vulnerable. So you get these retaliatory actions in the current system in the market, such as predatory investors mounting a hostile takeover bid to maintain short-term dividends. you'll have seen that there's a couple of really leading commitments that have been made, and investors have forced them back out just because they have a short-term mindset and look at their own returns. The benefits, though, are about the fact that it does actually restore the depleted ecosystems and weakened communities that provide a viable basis for continued human well-being and prosperity and doing business. It embraces the complexity of challenges in a way that makes finding solutions to root causes more likely, and therefore the solutions more likely to survive or be sustainable and not get undone. And it does drive disruptive innovation and unlocks exciting new sources of value for the business. And this is where you have quite radical revolutionary ambition. In a business that has this mindset, this is the type of thing that we would hear. And I'd be really interested to hear any examples that you have of where you've heard this kind of thing be said, or even where you've said this yourself. But how do you actually do this? This is all very well. It sounds all really lofty, and I'm aware that it can sound quite theoretical when you've got these frameworks like this. And you guys are at the front line of doing the real thing in action. So what does it actually mean? What do you actually have to do to be a just and regenerative business? In the guidance note that we've got, I won't go through the detail now because of the time. We have provided some really quite practical advice on what this means in 8 key functions: procurement and finance, marketing, human resources, as well as how to respond to 7 of the key sustainable development challenges across those functions. So please do take a look at that when we share the slides. I'd highly recommend it because I think it does have some very practical advice there for businesses that really have the ambition to go further and to realize the benefits above all 3 of those other levels. It does require some pretty fundamental shifts, not all of which look like they have immediate return on investment, and which is where it can get quite tricky for smaller organizations or entrepreneurs or startups. But you also benefit from the fact that you are starting from zero. You're not locked into the from characteristics on the left-hand side of this table if you're starting quite fresh. You have the opportunity to immediately go to the green ones on the right here, and you don't have the baggage that comes with a long legacy. I've got another poll here. I'd be really interested to hear on a scale of 1 to 5, where the left-hand column is the sort of from those characteristics of harmful or exploitative practices, and right is the 5. So if you match these 5 on the right-hand side, you score a 5. Where do you think the majority of Indian business is now? I'm really keen to hear, where do you think we currently are if we looked at the economy as a whole, the businesses as a whole, on a scale of 1 to 5? Sorry, it's not 1 to 5, but on these statements, which ones do you think it matches? Do you think that by far the majority of the economy is much more about short-term profit maximization, narrow views and zero-sum game mindsets, negative impacts are externalized, shareholder primacy? If that's the case, then go for that first one. If you think it's much more actually towards the right, and you're actually looking at reframing profit, much more healthy and resilient operating context, level playing fields, then the one at the bottom. Give you a few minutes just to have a think about that. Shamila, I'll take your guidance on when to share.
Yeah, I think we are. I can share now.
Okay. Yeah, I think that probably matches my experience. It's more to the left-hand side of this table than it is to the right-hand side. I think we are where we are. I think we have made progress over the last sort of 10 years or so, but we've also taken some steps back in how we've approached this transition. So I think I'd agree with the general sentiment in the room. Now I've got a different question. This is where I think I'm going to come to you, because I'm really intrigued by what you think here. I think there is a difference between the majority of Indian business and Indian entrepreneurs. So I'd be really intrigued to hear on this next poll where you think the majority of Indian entrepreneurs are on this table. Do you think they're more to the left, more to the right? Do you think it's the same as before? Okay, yeah, okay, so slightly more to the right. I think I would agree that it's slightly more to the right. I think what I'm seeing is a lot more purpose-led businesses come up from entrepreneurs. I feel like there is usually some sort of mission that you want to fulfill that is greater than just maximizing profits. And so, yeah, thank you. That's really interesting. I'd love to discuss more when we, in a few moments when we get to the chat. I guess to close out the presentation, I do want to underscore the fact that this new mindset that we're talking about, the just and regenerative business mindset, it does really mean thinking through the core tenets of the business. Your purpose, the ownership structure, financing, governance, your networks. So not just chains or linear chains, but recognizing the different networks, value networks, and that you depend on. It is essentially, as I said at the beginning, it is a new mindset plus new key principles, which in turn guide some fundamental shifts internally in a business to help get this to a place where all living systems thrive. So it's a much more aspirational, ambitious approach to doing business that is much more in line with how nature and society hopefully wishes to act. It might sound lofty, but we're seeing signals of this happening already. Everyone probably saw the announcement that the Patagonia owner has sold it to a foundation so that it doesn't need to focus on growth. That is the kind of mindset that we're talking about here. The networks initiative done by Interface is a fascinating example of, well, it's about discarded fishing nets that are collected and reprocessed into carpet tiles, but it also tackles the structures that keep poor people poor in fishing communities, like access to finance, power in decision-making, for instance. So it's not just about creating a circular or a carpet tile. It really tackles some of the fundamental societal structures that mean that people are in trouble in the first place. I'm keen to hear what other examples you might be seeing, or what thoughts actually that has inspired. And yeah, just thank you for listening. And I'm aware I've thrown a lot of information your way. The what is just and regenerative business, the how you might be able to do it, and yeah, a couple of examples there to finish. So yeah, keen to start the discussion.
Thank you so much, Anna, for this amazing talk. Definitely was very engaging, thought-provoking for sure, and also trying to align where we are, or as an entrepreneur, I'm sure people are trying to judge where they are in the spectrum. So that's really great. Thank you so much. So I think I will stop recording at this right now, and I would now hand over or call upon Priya to ask you a couple of questions just to keep the conversation going.
Can you hear me?